I thought he was just another angry dad, until he dropped to his knees and whispered, "I got you." The screech of tires was a raw, guttural sound that ripped through the stale air of the parking lot, a prelude to the chaos that was about to unfold. I slammed my own car door shut, the metallic clang echoing the frantic beat of my heart, already a knot of anger tightening in my gut. Another parent? Another scene. This was Tuesday. It could have been Wednesday. It was always some variation of this. A parent, usually the father, losing it over some perceived slight, some injustice against their kid. They'd puff up, their faces reddening, their voices escalating into a primal roar that made everyone else shrink back. And I, with my perfectly polished car and my meticulously curated life, would watch, a smug sense of superiority washing over me. Not me, I'd think. I've got this handled. My kid knows boundaries. I'm not one of those parents. I saw them all the time, these fathers whose pride was a brittle shield, easily shattered by the slightest perceived threat to their offspring. They'd come unglued, their carefully constructed composure dissolving into a spectacle of raw emotion, usually directed at the nearest authority figure, or in this case, the kid who dared to push their own too hard on the asphalt battlefield. I'd always prided myself on my control, on my ability to remain calm, rational, above the fray. My son Leo was a good kid, a smart kid. He didn't get into scrapes, and if he did, I was the one who would handle it, with quiet authority, with reasoned consequence, not with histrionics. The scene unfolding before me was a familiar one, a tired cliché played out in school parking lots and sports fields across the country. A burly man, his face a roadmap of stress and exhaustion, was yelling, his voice cracking with a desperation I'd only ever witnessed in myself in moments of extreme professional pressure. He was gesturing wildly, his hands flailing like trapped birds, his words a blur of accusation and anguish. The target of his fury, a boy no older than Leo, stood frozen, his own face pale, a mixture of fear and defiance warring in his eyes. I had seen enough. This was the kind of parent I actively avoided, the kind whose emotional volatility felt like a contagion I desperately needed to quarantine myself from. My instinct was to retreat, to pull Leo close, to shield him from this ugliness, to reaffirm my own superior parenting. I had a meeting to get to, a tight schedule, and this was an unwelcome, messy interruption. I started to turn away, already mentally rehearsing the calm, measured response I would give Leo if he ever witnessed such a display, a lesson in composure. But then, something shifted. The man's voice, which had been a torrent of rage, suddenly broke, a ragged sob escaping his throat. The aggressive posture faltered, his shoulders slumping as if an invisible weight had suddenly crushed him. He didn't storm off. He didn't threaten further. Instead, he did something so profoundly unexpected, so utterly out of character for the raging figure I had just judged, that it stopped me dead in my tracks. He sank to his knees. The harsh asphalt, the indifferent stares of other parents, the bewildered silence of the children, none of it seemed to register. His head bowed, his hands, moments before so animated in their fury, now rested limply on the grimy ground. And then he whispered. It wasn't a shout, not a curse, not an accusation. It was a whisper, barely audible, a fragile thread of sound that seemed to hold the weight of the world. My own carefully constructed walls of judgment, of detached observation, began to crumble. The man wasn't just an angry dad. He was a man at his breaking point, a father drowning in a sea of fear and helplessness, his anger a desperate, flailing attempt to stay afloat. The sheer vulnerability of the moment, the raw, unvarnished pain etched on his face as he knelt there, was a mirror reflecting a part of myself I had long suppressed, a fear of failing my own child that I had buried beneath layers of control and perceived competence. In that instant, the smug superiority I had felt evaporated, replaced by a chilling recognition of shared humanity, a dawning awareness that the line between us and them was far thinner and far more permeable than I had ever allowed myself to believe. The usual Tuesday parking lot drama had just become something else entirely. The air, thick with the residual tension of the outburst, seemed to hum with an unspoken question. The boy, his initial fear morphing into a bewildered concern, slowly approached his father. He didn't recoil. He didn't scold. He simply knelt beside the man, his small hand tentatively reaching out to touch his father's slumped shoulder. It was a gesture so pure, so devoid of judgment, that it was like a balm on the raw wound of the scene. The father flinched slightly, then turned his head, his eyes red-rimmed and glistening, meeting his son's. The raw anger had drained away, leaving behind a profound, aching vulnerability. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The silence between them was more eloquent than any shouted word. It spoke of fear, of exhaustion, of a desperate love that had momentarily curdled into rage. I watched, my own breath catching in my throat, the carefully constructed edifice of my own perceived control beginning to crack. My son Leo, who'd been clinging to my leg, his eyes wide with alarm, now looked not at the father and son but at me, his expression unreadable. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of something I couldn't quite name. Shame, perhaps, or a dawning, uncomfortable empathy. I had been so quick to judge, so certain of my own righteousness, that I had failed to see the human being beneath the anger, the father beneath the fury. The man on the asphalt wasn't a caricature. He was a man struggling just as I struggled, just as everyone struggled, to navigate the bewildering landscape of parenthood. The boy, his small hand still resting on his father's shoulder, spoke then, his voice soft, almost a murmur. "It's okay, Dad," he said, his gaze steady. "I got you." The words, simple and unconditional, hung in the air, a powerful counterpoint to the earlier rage. The father's shoulders shuddered, and he pulled his son into a tight embrace, burying his face in the boy's hair. It was a silent confession, a profound act of surrender, and a testament to a bond that, despite everything, remained unbroken. I felt a tremor run through my own hand, a sudden urge to reach out, to offer some word, some gesture, but I remained rooted to the spot, an unwilling witness to a moment of profound human connection. The scene had shifted, the narrative I had so confidently written in my head, erased and rewritten in a matter of moments. The anger I had so readily condemned was merely a symptom, a desperate cry for help from a man overwhelmed. My own judgmental gaze, so quick to categorize and dismiss, felt suddenly hollow, exposed. I had seen not a display of parental failure, but a raw, unvarnished moment of paternal struggle, a father's desperate attempt to protect his child, a love so fierce it had momentarily warped into something ugly. The boy's simple reassurance, his unwavering support, was a lesson delivered not through words but through action, a quiet demonstration of empathy that resonated far more deeply than any lecture. I felt a profound shift within myself, a subtle but significant recalibration of my own perspective. The world, which had seemed so neatly divided into good and bad parents, suddenly appeared far more complex, far more nuanced, far more human. The man finally rose, his movements stiff, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond mere physical exhaustion. He didn't offer an explanation, no apology to the gathered onlookers. His world, for that moment, had shrunk to the space between him and his son. He simply looked at the boy, a profound gratitude in his eyes, and squeezed his shoulder before turning towards their waiting car. The boy walked beside him, not with the apprehension I had initially expected, but with a quiet solidarity, his hand occasionally brushing his father's arm. They got into the car, the doors closing with a soft thud, a stark contrast to the violent screech that had heralded their arrival. As they drove away, the car's taillights a fading ember against the darkening sky. A profound silence descended upon the parking lot. The other parents, who had been watching with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment, now seemed to disperse, their own urgent errands and carefully scheduled lives reclaiming them. I stood there for a moment longer, the echo of the father's whispered words, "I got you," still reverberating in the quiet space where his rage had once been. It wasn't the anger that lingered, but the desperate plea, the raw vulnerability, and the unconditional response. Leo tugged at my hand, his small fingers warm against my skin. He looked up at me, his eyes no longer wide with fear, but with a gentle curiosity. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He had seen it, felt it, and in his own way understood it. I knelt down, bringing myself to his level, the asphalt cool beneath my knees. I looked into his innocent face, a face I had sworn to protect, to guide, to nurture. And in that moment, I saw not just my son, but a reflection of the boy on the asphalt, and the father who had fallen to his knees. My own carefully constructed armor of self-righteousness felt suddenly heavy, suffocating. The urge to lecture, to explain, to impart some grand lesson was overwhelming. But I resisted. Instead, I simply opened my arms. Leo hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped into my embrace, his small body molding against mine. I held him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, the familiar comfort of his presence. It wasn't the triumphant roar of victory or the measured calm of control. It was something far more profound, a quiet, unyielding connection, a simple act of holding, of being present. The world outside the parking lot continued its relentless spin, the demands of schedules and responsibilities waiting, but for this one suspended moment, there was only the quiet strength of an embrace, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity, and the unspoken promise of unwavering support. The anger of a stranger had cracked open a door within me, revealing a truth I had long ignored, that beneath the bravest facades, we are all just trying to hold on, to be held, to whisper, "I got you," and to hear it in return. The faint scent of exhaust fumes mingled with the lingering chill of the evening air as I finally started my own car. The engine turned over with a familiar hum, a sound that usually signaled a return to order, to the predictable rhythm of my life. But tonight, the sound felt different, imbued with a new resonance. Leo was quiet in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the passing streetlights, each one a brief, bright punctuation mark in the deepening twilight. I glanced at him, a silent question in my eyes, but he offered no easy answers, only a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. The encounter in the parking lot had left an indelible mark, a subtle but significant shift in the landscape of my own inner world. The man's raw vulnerability, the boy's quiet compassion, these images were seared into my mind, a potent antidote to my own ingrained tendency towards judgment and detachment. I had arrived at the parking lot with a certainty of my own moral superiority, a belief that I was somehow immune to the messy, emotional struggles that plagued other parents. But the father's brokenness, his desperate whisper, had shattered that illusion. It had revealed the thin veil of control I had so carefully maintained, the fear of failure that lay beneath my polished exterior. And in the boy's simple gesture of solidarity, I had witnessed a profound truth, that true strength lies not in the absence of struggle, but in the willingness to stand by those who are struggling, to offer an unwavering hand of support. As we drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, I felt a quiet unfolding within me, a gentle loosening of the tight knots of self-importance. The need to categorize, to judge, to distance myself from the perceived imperfections of others began to recede, replaced by a nascent understanding, a flicker of empathy that felt both fragile and profound. I had come to witness a display of parental failure, but I was leaving with a glimpse of profound human resilience. The world hadn't changed, the challenges of parenthood remained, but my perspective had irrevocably shifted. I realized that the most important lessons are often delivered not through grand pronouncements or philosophical discourse, but through the quiet grace of an unexpected encounter, a whispered confession, and the simple, powerful act of holding on. The weight of my own expectations, the pressure to always be the perfect parent, began to lift, replaced by a quiet acceptance of imperfection, a recognition that true connection is forged not in flawless execution, but in shared vulnerability and unwavering support. The streetlights painted fleeting, warm strokes across the dashboard as we finally pulled into our driveway. The house stood silent, a dark silhouette against the star-dusted canvas of the night sky. Leo unbuckled his seatbelt with a soft click, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet of the car. He didn't rush inside, didn't demand entry. Instead, he paused at the door, turning back to me. The porch light cast a gentle glow on his face, illuminating a quiet understanding that seemed to transcend his years. He didn't say a word, no grand pronouncements or childish complaints. He simply offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. It was a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had just taken, a shared understanding of the unspoken lessons learned. I met his gaze, a profound sense of peace settling over me. The need to articulate, to explain, to dissect the events of the evening had evaporated, replaced by a quiet recognition of something far more meaningful. In that shared silence, a new understanding bloomed, a quiet promise that echoed the father's whispered words in the parking lot. It was the silent language of connection, of unwavering support, of a love that simply held on. My own carefully constructed walls of judgment had crumbled, revealing not a void, but a space for deeper connection, for a more compassionate understanding of the human heart. The anger I had witnessed was not the end of the story, but a desperate plea for it. And in the boy's simple act of being there, I had seen the beginning of redemption, a testament to the enduring power of love that simply whispers, "I got you." A single porch light flickered on, a beacon against the encroaching dark. The subtle shift in my internal landscape began to manifest in tangible ways, a quiet recalibration of my daily interactions. It wasn't a dramatic overhaul, but a series of small, almost imperceptible adjustments. For instance, observing Leo's frustration during a particularly challenging math problem, my initial instinct had always been to jump in, to offer the solution, to fix it for him, thereby reinforcing my image as the problem solver, the one who had it all together. Now, however, I found myself taking a breath, stepping back, and simply offering a quiet presence. I'd sit nearby, perhaps sorting through mail, my attention outwardly casual, but my awareness keenly focused on his struggle. Instead of providing the answer, I'd ask open-ended questions, prompting him to articulate his thought process, to untangle the knots of his confusion himself. This deliberate act of withholding my immediate expertise, of allowing him to grapple with the difficulty, fostered a newfound patience, not just in him, but more significantly, in myself. It was a stark contrast to my previous approach, where efficiency and immediate resolution had been paramount. Now, the process itself, the journey of discovery, held a quiet dignity. Furthermore, my interactions in professional settings, once characterized by a competitive edge and a subtle, almost unconscious drive to assert my dominance, began to soften. Confronted with a colleague's less-than-perfect proposal, my immediate reaction used to be to identify the flaws, to point out the deficiencies with a sharp, analytical gaze, often framing it as constructive criticism, but inwardly feeling a surge of validation for my own superior foresight. This time, however, when presented with a similar scenario, a project proposal riddled with potential pitfalls and logistical oversights, I found myself approaching it differently. Instead of immediately dissecting its weaknesses, I focused on its strengths, on the innovative ideas it contained and the effort that had clearly gone into its creation. I then, and this was the crucial shift, approached the colleague not with a list of corrections, but with a series of collaborative inquiries. "Have you considered how this might impact X?" I'd ask, or what if we explored Y as a potential enhancement here? This approach, born from the parking lot encounter, transformed a potential point of conflict into an opportunity for shared problem solving. It was about building up, not tearing down, about recognizing that every contribution, however flawed, stems from a place of effort and intent, and that fostering a sense of shared ownership often yields far more robust and sustainable solutions than individual critique ever could. Consequently, the subtle erosion of my judgmental tendencies extended even to casual observations of strangers. Where before I might have mentally catalogued the perceived shortcomings of others, the hurried shopper's impatience, the distracted driver's apparent carelessness, the parent struggling with a crying child, I now found myself pausing, offering a silent acknowledgement of their humanity. This wasn't about excusing behavior, but about recognizing the vast, unseen complexities that shape every individual's moment. Observing a young woman fumbling with her keys at a grocery store, her arms laden with bags, my old self might have registered it as an inconvenience, a minor annoyance in my own efficient flow. The new me, however, saw a person navigating a moment of everyday challenge. I found myself instinctively offering a small, genuine smile, a subtle nod of solidarity that asked for nothing in return. This simple, wordless gesture, a far cry from my previous tendency to inwardly critique or ignore, felt like a small act of rebellion against my own ingrained biases. It was a conscious choice to see the person, not the perceived flaw, a recognition that everyone at any given moment is engaged in their own silent battles, their own intricate dance of life, and that a little grace, a little understanding can make an immeasurable difference. This burgeoning empathy, this quiet understanding, was no longer an abstract concept, but a lived, felt reality, shaping my interactions in ways both profound and subtle. The shift in my perspective wasn't merely an intellectual adjustment. It began to permeate the subtle, often overlooked interactions of daily life, particularly in how I navigated the seemingly mundane routines with Leo. Previously, our shared moments often revolved around structured activities, my agenda dictating the pace and purpose. If Leo expressed interest in something that deviated from my plan, say a sudden fascination with a discarded, rust-eaten bicycle on the curb, my inclination was to gently steer him back to our predetermined outing, perhaps a museum or a park, citing time constraints or the impracticality of his chosen diversion. This ensured efficiency, a smooth progression through the day, but it also inadvertently communicated a devaluation of his spontaneous curiosities. Now, however, I found myself pausing, genuinely considering his fascination. Instead of dismissing it, I'd actively engage, asking him what drew him to the object, encouraging him to articulate his observations about its condition, its potential story. This wasn't about indulging every whim, but about demonstrating a newfound respect for his individual locus of interest, acknowledging that his internal world held value independent of my own objectives. This subtle redirection, this willingness to momentarily deviate from the established path, fostered a deeper sense of validation in Leo, a quiet understanding that his observations were not just tolerated, but genuinely considered. Furthermore, this newfound attentiveness began to reshape my engagement with community spaces, particularly the local farmers' market. Before, I'd navigate the stalls with a singular focus on procuring specific items, my interactions transactional and brief. A quick nod to the farmer, a polite exchange of money for produce, and then on to the next vendor. The rich tapestry of human interaction woven through these communal hubs was largely lost on me, perceived as mere background noise to my task. However, after the parking lot revelation, I started to perceive the vendors not just as suppliers, but as individuals with stories, with lives that intersected with mine in a shared space. I began to linger, to ask about the origin of a particular heirloom tomato, to inquire about the weather's impact on the berry harvest. These weren't profound conversations, but they were genuine exchanges, rooted in a curiosity that extended beyond mere commerce. This shift transformed the market from a chore into an experience, fostering a sense of connection to the people who provided sustenance, a recognition of their labor and their place within the community fabric. It was a subtle but significant expansion of my social awareness, moving from a self-contained transactional model to one that embraced interdependence. Another crucial layer is revealed in how this burgeoning empathy began to influence my perception of public spaces, specifically the quiet sanctuary of the local library. My prior visits were utilitarian. I'd enter with a specific book in mind, navigate the aisles with a hushed, almost furtive efficiency, and exit once my objective was met. The presence of other patrons was an environmental factor to be navigated, not individuals to be acknowledged. Now, however, I found myself observing the quiet dramas unfolding around me with a different lens. I noticed the elderly gentleman meticulously selecting large print novels, his brow furrowed in concentration, and I understood it not as a sign of frailty, but of a persistent engagement with the world of stories. I saw the young student poring over textbooks, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a reading lamp, and recognized the quiet determination etched in her posture. These were not just anonymous figures occupying space. They were individuals engaged in their own quests for knowledge, for solace, for escape. My movements became less about efficient acquisition and more about a respectful presence, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared pursuit of quiet contemplation. I began to offer small, unobtrusive smiles, a subtle recognition of our shared space, a silent testament to the understanding that even in solitude we are part of a larger human tapestry. This quiet observation, this internal shift in perception, was transforming the mundane into moments of subtle connection, weaving a new thread into the fabric of my daily existence. The ripple effect of that parking lot encounter began to manifest in my approach to Leo's friendships, a realm I had previously managed with a tight, almost possessive grip. My focus had always been on perceived character, on ensuring Leo associated with children I deemed suitable, those exhibiting a similar quiet competence and academic aptitude. Any child who displayed boisterous energy, a penchant for imaginative play that bordered on the chaotic, or a perceived lack of immediate intellectual polish, was subtly but firmly discouraged. This curated social circle, I believed, was a shield, protecting Leo from the perceived negative influences of rougher, less polished peers. However, the raw vulnerability I witnessed that day, the father's desperate reach for connection despite his outward aggression, forced me to question the superficiality of my own judgment. Now, when Leo expressed interest in a new classmate, a boy known for his boundless energy and a tendency to get into minor scrapes, a child I would have previously dismissed outright, I found myself resisting the ingrained urge to intervene. Instead, I encouraged Leo to explore the connection, to simply be present with this new dynamic. I observed their interactions from a distance, not with a critical eye looking for flaws, but with a developing curiosity about the genuine joy they seemed to find in each other's company. The boisterous laughter, the shared schemes of imaginary adventures, elements I would have once seen as distractions now appeared as vibrant expressions of unfiltered childhood, a stark contrast to the carefully controlled environments I had favored. This deliberate step back, This allowance for Leo to forge his own social compass was not an abdication of responsibility, but a profound act of trust, acknowledging that true social development stems from authentic connection, not from pre-approved associations. This recalibration extended into my own professional interactions, particularly in collaborative projects where differing methodologies or aesthetic sensibilities clashed. Previously, my instinct was to champion my own approach with unwavering conviction, subtly highlighting the perceived shortcomings of alternative viewpoints. This often led to tense negotiations, where the pursuit of the best outcome devolved into a battle of wills, my own ego subtly intertwined with the project's success. The experience in the parking lot, however, had planted a seed of doubt regarding the absolute validity of my own perspective. It prompted a shift from defending my position to actively seeking to understand the rationale behind others. When a colleague proposed a design that, at first glance, seemed inefficient and overly ornate compared to my own streamlined vision, I consciously resisted the urge to immediately point out its impracticalities. Instead, I asked questions, probing the underlying intent, the artistic or emotional resonance they sought to achieve. I discovered that their inefficiency was a deliberate choice, aimed at evoking a specific historical period, a nuance that my purely functional assessment had entirely missed. This realization was humbling, underscoring the fact that better is often subjective, dependent on context and intended purpose. Consequently, I learned to approach disagreements not as battles to be won, but as opportunities to broaden my own understanding, to weave together disparate threads into a richer, more comprehensive tapestry. This willingness to cede the absolute authority of my own viewpoint, to embrace the validity of alternative perspectives, fostered a more collaborative and ultimately more innovative working environment. Consider how this applies when you're faced with a seemingly insurmountable obstacle in your own life. The instinct, much like the father's initial rage, is often to lash out, to blame external factors, to feel overwhelmed by a sense of powerlessness. However, the quiet strength displayed by the son, his simple act of enduring presence, offers a different path. It's not about solving the problem immediately, but about acknowledging the struggle, about offering a steady, unwavering support to oneself or to another navigating that difficulty. This might manifest as simply allowing yourself to feel the frustration without judgment, or reaching out to a trusted friend, not for an immediate solution, but for the simple comfort of shared experience. This practice of bearing witness to the difficulty, of offering that quiet, unconditional presence, is not a passive surrender, but an active cultivation of resilience. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful action is not to conquer the obstacle head-on, but to stand beside it, to endure it, and to trust that the strength to move forward will emerge from that shared space of vulnerability. It is in these moments of quiet solidarity, of unadorned empathy, that the true foundations of resilience are laid, not through forceful assertion, but through steadfast presence. The profound recalibration initiated by that encounter in the parking lot began to subtly reshape my understanding of ambition and its potential pitfalls, particularly in the context of personal achievement and the pursuit of professional recognition. My former self operated under a stringent, almost binary definition of success, a clear trajectory of advancement marked by tangible accolades and quantifiable results. Any deviation from this prescribed path, any perceived setback, was not merely a delay but a personal failing, a testament to insufficient drive or strategic misstep. This mindset often manifested as an almost clinical detachment when evaluating the efforts of others, especially those whose careers seemed to meander or stall. I'd observe colleagues who, despite evident dedication, appeared to plateau, and my internal monologue would invariably attribute it to a lack of foresight or an insufficient willingness to take calculated risks. a judgment I now recognized as a form of my own ethical blind spot. Building on this understanding, however, I started to perceive a different kind of ambition, one less concerned with climbing a predetermined ladder and more focused on the intrinsic value of the work itself and the positive impact it generated. Consider how this applies when you're navigating a project where the metrics of success are not immediately obvious or easily quantifiable. Instead of solely focusing on the bottom line or the immediate recognition, I began to ask different questions. What is the underlying need this addresses? How does this endeavor genuinely contribute to the well-being of others, even in a small way? This shift in focus led me to reevaluate a long-standing professional relationship with a former mentor. He had, by my previous standards, plateaued years ago, eschewing the high-stakes, high-reward environments that I had so eagerly pursued. I had viewed his steady, consistent contributions to less glamorous, foundational aspects of our field as a form of stagnation. Now, however, I saw his unwavering commitment to mentorship, his meticulous cultivation of emerging talent, and his dedication to preserving historical knowledge not as a lack of ambition, but as a different and perhaps more profound form of it. His quiet dedication, his focus on nurturing growth rather than personal aggrandizement, represented a form of ethical leadership I had previously overlooked, blinded by my own narrow definition of success. Consequently, this evolved perspective began to influence my approach to mentorship itself. Rather than solely identifying and grooming individuals who mirrored my own trajectory, those possessing a similar drive for outward achievement, I started to seek out and encourage those whose strengths lay in areas I had previously undervalued. This included individuals who demonstrated exceptional empathy, a natural inclination towards collaborative problem-solving, or a deep commitment to ethical considerations, even if these qualities didn't immediately translate into a visible climb up the corporate hierarchy. I began to actively foster an environment where these less conventionally celebrated attributes were not just acknowledged, but actively cultivated. For instance, when reviewing project proposals, I started to place equal, if not greater, weight on the ethical implications and the potential for positive community impact, alongside the projected financial returns or market share gains. This was a significant departure from my previous modus operandi, where the bottom line had been the ultimate arbiter of value. Furthermore, this broadened understanding of ambition extended to how I perceived the concept of legacy. My prior conception was largely tied to enduring achievements, to innovations that would be documented in textbooks or remembered for their disruptive impact. It was about leaving an indelible mark on the professional landscape through singular accomplishments. Now, however, I began to see legacy not just as a monument to individual prowess, but as a living, breathing network of influence, a ripple effect of positive actions and nurtured potential. Consider how this applies when you're mentoring someone whose career path diverges significantly from your own. Instead of trying to mold them to fit your established model, you begin to ask how you can best support their unique journey, empowering them to define success on their own terms. This might involve connecting them with resources or individuals outside your immediate network, advocating for opportunities that align with their specific talents rather than your own perceived best interests, or simply offering a listening ear and validating their chosen direction. This approach shifts the focus from replicating oneself to fostering independent growth, recognizing that true legacy lies not in the permanence of one's own achievements, but in the sustained positive impact one has on the growth and well-being of others, creating a more dynamic and ethically grounded definition of enduring influence. The notion of legacy itself underwent a radical redefinition in my mind, moving beyond the grand pronouncements of singular achievements to embrace a more nuanced understanding of influence. Previously, my ambition was laser-focused on leaving a distinct, indelible mark, an innovation that would be etched into industry annals, a project so disruptive it would fundamentally alter the landscape. This outlook often led me to assess the contributions of others through a similarly singular lens, prioritizing visible milestones and quantifiable successes. Colleagues who dedicated themselves to more foundational, less glamorous aspects of our field, or whose impact was spread across numerous smaller, nurturing initiatives, were often perceived by my former self as lacking the necessary drive for true distinction. Building on this evolving perspective, however, I began to recognize that true legacy is not solely forged in the crucible of singular, earth-shattering achievements, but also in the quiet, persistent cultivation of others. Consider how this applies when you are guiding someone whose strengths lie in areas that don't immediately align with traditional metrics of success. Instead of pushing them toward a path that mirrors your own trajectory, the focus shifts to empowering their unique talents. This might involve connecting them with opportunities that allow them to hone their innate abilities in empathy or collaborative problem-solving, even if these skills don't translate into immediate promotions or headline-grabbing projects. It's about fostering an environment where their contributions are valued for their inherent worth, not just their immediate visibility. Consequently, this broadened perspective necessitated a re-evaluation of how I defined mentorship. My prior approach had been largely extractive, focused on identifying and grooming protégés who could replicate my own successes, thereby extending my perceived influence. The encounter in the parking lot, however, had underscored the profound impact of simple, unadorned support, the power of simply being present for someone else's struggle. This led me to actively seek out and champion individuals whose strengths lay in areas I had once overlooked, those who excelled in fostering team cohesion, demonstrating exceptional ethical reasoning, or possessing an innate ability to de-escalate conflict, even if these qualities didn't immediately translate into a visible ascent up the corporate ladder. This was a significant departure from my previous operational model, where outward markers of achievement had been the ultimate arbiter of potential. Furthermore, this evolving understanding of ambition began to inform how I approached the concept of professional impact. My earlier definition was heavily skewed towards disruptive innovation and market dominance. The legacy I aspired to was one of monumental change, of being remembered as a catalyst for significant shifts in our industry. Now, however, I started to perceive impact as a more intricate, interwoven tapestry. It encompassed not only groundbreaking discoveries, but also the consistent, quiet work of building robust systems, fostering collaborative cultures, and nurturing the next generation of ethical practitioners. This shifted my focus from solely seeking the monumental to valuing the cumulative effect of consistent, principled action. It meant recognizing the profound influence of seemingly small gestures. A word of encouragement, a shared moment of vulnerability, an act of steadfast support, as integral components of a truly meaningful and enduring legacy. This nuanced perspective acknowledged that impact is not always loud and disruptive. Often it is quiet, pervasive, and deeply human. Reflecting on this journey so far, the disparate threads of experience begin to coalesce, not into a neat summary, but into a more complex, interwoven tapestry. The initial stark judgments, once so confidently held, now appear as mere outlines, softened and enriched by the myriad shades of human complexity revealed through unexpected encounters. The rigid boundaries we erect, built from assumptions and a desire for control, have proven permeable, yielding to the undeniable force of shared vulnerability and the quiet power of genuine connection. It's as if the sharp edges of our certainty have been smoothed by the persistent tide of lived experience, revealing a landscape far more nuanced and interconnected than initially perceived. As we pivot towards the final reflection, consider the subtle recalibration that occurs when one's internal compass is nudged by empathy's gentle yet persistent hand. The pursuit of outward markers of success, once the sole determinant of value, now yields to a deeper appreciation for the intrinsic qualities of effort, intention, and sustained positive influence. The measure of achievement expands, encompassing not just the grand pronouncements of innovation, but the quieter, more enduring contributions that shape communities and nurture potential, often unseen, but undeniably vital. It's like understanding that a forest is not defined solely by its tallest trees, but by the intricate network of roots and the slow, vital growth occurring beneath the surface. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer, not in terms of prescribed actions, but in the cultivation of a more attuned perspective. The tendency to categorize and dismiss, to seek definitive judgments, begins to recede, replaced by an openness to the unfolding narrative of each individual's journey. This does not imply an absence of discernment, but rather a more profound understanding that true insight emerges not from immediate pronouncements, but from a sustained engagement with the complexities of human experience. The anticipation builds not for a definitive answer, but for a deeper appreciation of the ongoing process, the continuous unfolding of understanding that defines our shared existence. The parking lot, once a stage for my quick judgments and carefully guarded composure, had become a silent testament to a truth far more profound than I had ever been willing to acknowledge. The raw, ragged edge of a father's desperation, met by the quiet, unwavering strength of his son, had chipped away at the polished veneer of my own certainty. It was a moment that stripped away the pretense of control, revealing the shared vulnerability that underpins every human interaction, regardless of the outward presentation of anger or success. This wasn't about assigning blame or dissecting motives. It was about recognizing the fundamental human need to be seen, to be understood, and, most importantly, to be held. The encounter served as a stark reminder that the lines we draw between ourselves and others, between the capable and the struggling, the composed and the unraveled, are often illusory, built on superficial observations rather than a deeper understanding of the shared human condition. My ambition, once a singular pursuit of external validation, has begun to transform, its focus subtly shifting from the grand pronouncements of individual achievement to the quieter, more enduring influence of cultivated connection. The legacy I now aspire to is not merely a monument to personal success, but a testament to the positive ripples created by fostering growth in others, by championing empathy, and by acknowledging the inherent value in every individual's journey, regardless of its outward trajectory. This recalibration means actively seeking out and valuing qualities like compassion and collaborative spirit, not as secondary considerations, but as integral components of true leadership and lasting impact. It's about understanding that the most significant contributions are often those that build up, that nurture, that create a more connected and understanding community, rather than those that solely aim to disrupt or dominate. The true practice begins now, not in seeking grand gestures, but in the consistent, quiet cultivation of presence and empathy. It lies in the deliberate pause before judgment, in the willingness to ask questions rather than offer pronouncements, and in the profound act of simply being there for another, offering an unwavering hand of support without expectation of immediate resolution or reward. It's in recognizing that a shared moment of vulnerability, a simple acknowledgement of struggle, can be more transformative than any calculated strategy. The world, once viewed through a lens of rigid categories and predictable outcomes, now reveals itself as a dynamic, interconnected web where genuine impact is forged not through solitary brilliance, but through the quiet strength of shared humanity, a persistent whisper of "I got you," echoing through the spaces between